good
too much
question.
on it.
Is it just like one long bone?
We'll have to.
I think they just have feet. They just connect to their body. Mine said they just have feet that are connected to their body. They don't really have
They
legs.
might have knees, but they're like, since their legs are so short.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's like owls, where you know, like if you lift up their like body, you can see how long their legs are. I wonder if you lift up their body, you can see how long their legs are.
It doesn't look like it. Or they're just really short.
Yeah, they might just be that short.
This coffee is not very sweet. I have sugar in it. But I also put a lot of sugar in it, so.
Have that. What's your favorite flavor? Great.
There's no bread to go with it. Just spill like that.
Come on in,
Oh,
that's
it's a
just water.
Kentucky shirt.
Just water.
Oh, I thought it
Just
was
like the
grape.
condensation. You probably would have been able to see it if it was great.
That's true.
Mom. Look at the penguins. They're perfect. They're each doing something different. I got the flower one.
Cute. That
They're
was
so chubby and tiny.
I know.
That's when Henry got
I just want to sit straight. What's up with that? What aggressive
Oh,
steps.
that's a good thing.
There we go. Oh, I should like probably do something.
has a lot of information on it in it about what's happening in the life of our church. A couple of things just to draw your attention to is that we are starting a couple of new discipleship groups during the week. So in the past couple of weeks, we've been encouraging you to join the discipleship group that's here on Sunday mornings at 9:45. There's a couple of new opportunities. For women, there's a couple of opportunities on a Tuesday, beginning of Tuesday, January 28th and Wednesday, January 29th. There's two different groups for women. They're going to study the same book, but you can sign up for those out in the lobby and get more details. And then there's a group for men that's also starting that same Wednesday. And the sign-up sheets for all three of those groups are out in the lobby if that's something that you're interested in. I encourage everybody to be a part of a group to get to life together, to get to dig deep into God's Word, and to build relationship and pray with one another. So hopefully you'll consider joining one of those. Our youth group is going tonight, so if you are a student and you want to come, 7th through 12th grade youth group, we'll see you tonight at 5 o'clock. Yeah, a couple of them are coming. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a good time. Invite your friends, bring your friend with you. We're still asking if people want to help serve our students, if you want to make dinner for them on a Sunday night, or if you want to donate canned drinks or snacks. That would be a great way at the start of the semester to help support our students. So if you want to do any of those things, get with me at the end of the service and I'll help get you signed up for that. If you brought an offering today and consider this place your home and get an offering, you can get it on the way out in the baskets or the bowls that are on the table out there in the lobby. And then also, if you want to fill out the bottom part of your bulletin, tear that off and drop those in the offering baskets, that would be great too. But let us know that you are here. If there's any way that we can serve you or stuff you want to know about us, that's a great way for us to communicate with you. So if you want to fill that out and drop that in, it'd be awesome. I'm going to say a prayer for us, and then we're going to say good morning to the people around us. We're going to sing a little bit more, and then we're going to dive into God's Word together. Will you pray with me? God, we're so glad this morning to get to be in your presence and to get to worship you in this space. And I just pray that while we're here, that we would turn our attention to you, turn our hearts to you. God, that you would take away distractions, that we would be able to concentrate on who you are. Maybe to learn a little bit more about your great love for us, a little bit more about the person of Jesus, a little bit more about the person of Daniel that we're going to study today. And God, I pray that however we came in the door, God, that we're able to meet you in this place, that we would open ourselves up a little bit more to take a next step in our faith journey to follow you. We're so grateful for Jesus and for the work that he did for us and the way that he makes it possible for us to be in a right relationship with you and with the rest of the world. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, if you will stand up and tell somebody around you good morning, or meet a new friend, that would be awesome.
Dad's got you to send.
Morning. So I keep looking up and I see the screen and it's blue. Oops.
So all the songs that we're singing today are kind of the exact same lyrics over and over again. It's the idea that we're going to follow what God says and we're going to look to Him no matter what's happening all around us or no matter what's happening in the world or what the world says we ought to do. So if it feels to you like we're singing the same song over and over, we're kind of singing the same song over and over. And this is another way just to declare to God that we're going to follow Him and we're not going to turn back. So sing this one with us.
No turning back.
Thank you for singing along with us. You can have a seat, and at this time we want to invite our kids who are ages 3 years old to 3rd grade to head to Well Junior. You guys will meet your leaders in the back, and then families will pick them up in the classroom at the end of the service today.
Morning. So it's not our practice to offer a ton of birthday shout outs from the stage, because I mean everybody gets one and they get it every year, right? But if you show up to church on your 90th birthday, you're going to get recognized. And so if Miss Alice Lewis is in the back, she's hanging back there. That is Aaron Gates' grandmother. And we're so glad that you're here. We are so glad that you're here, and we wish you incredible blessings in this upcoming year. So I'm glad y'all are here too, by the way, just so you know. Even if it ain't your birthday, even if you're not 90, we are glad that you're here. My name is Ben. If I haven't got a chance to meet you, I would love to at least shake your hand and say hi after the service. But we are so glad that you've carved this time out to be with us. We are launching out into a brand new sermon series. We are going to be walking, as Emily already said, walking through the book of Daniel. You might remember some of Daniel's stories, right? Maybe from Sunday school. Maybe you just heard about them throughout culture. I mean, any guy that jumps in a den of, with lions and tigers and anyways, no, there's his stories sort of go ahead of him almost, right? And today's story may not be incredibly familiar, but it sort of sets the stage for the entire letter. And so we're gonna spend some time walking through Daniel's book. It is a book that is considered like literarily, just go with that, please. Is apocalyptic. So it's I mean, he's a prophet. He's telling stories, but then there's also some visions. And we're going to get into that toward the end, but we're going to begin with the stories. In fact, his book is split kind of into 2 parts, stories and then visions and dreams. And so a couple things to note about the book. We believe Daniel authored it, at least directed to have it preserved. We also believe it was written in the early 600 BC, so like 605 BC. And we also believe, this is the part I think is incredibly clever, so all of our students pay real close attention. Daniel, we believe, was about 17 years old when all of what we read about today transpired. And so he was just a teenager, right? And so it's an incredible story. But the whole push today is to listen to how Daniel responds in a time of difficulty, and I'll explain the difficulty. But in order to do that, I want to tell you real quickly, when I graduated from USM, Golden Eagles, and I did so only living on campus 1 semester. Like, I commuted. In fact, most of my USM classes took place at the Keesler Air Force Base. My degree is in technical and occupational education, and because Keesler being a training base, USM had a small little branch there on, they were in rented space, but where they worked with instructors to help them get a degree. And I sort of rode in on the coattails of some of those men and women and got my degree that way. And so I only spent 1 semester in Hattiesburg on campus, and I was only there about 4 nights of the week. In fact, while I was on campus, I still had a night class down here. And so, at any rate, I tell you all of that to let you know that when my mama and daddy, yes, even as a college graduate, my mom and daddy took me to Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky, the farthest north I had ever been. And they dumped me off at seminary. And, I mean, I'm not joking. I lived slightly north of I-10 growing up, and that's about as far north as I ever had gone or really cared to go. And so, anyway, I got to Kentucky, and it was, to say, a culture shock. And I know, Kentucky, Mississippi, there's a lot of places I could have gone and been shocked even harder. But the reality was I wasn't home anymore. In fact, if you wanted to have a glass of sweet tea, you had to specify you wanted sweet tea. It was not the default, right? However, for their grits, default was a little sweet too. People didn't really know much, didn't do much grits. Some people put sugar in their grits, and so I thought this is oddly strange. But I think what really took the cake was if you order barbecue in the state of Kentucky, you don't get beef, you don't get cow, you don't get cow, you don't get pig, you don't get chicken, okay? You get mutton. It just sounds delicious, right? Mutton is okay. If you order lamb, you're getting young sheep. If you order mutton, you're getting old sheep, right? And it's not great. It's not great, and that's me being very generous. Okay, so I was in a place I didn't belong. Now I did absorb some of the culture. In fact, brought some of it back with me, and I'm so grateful that I did. And so, yes. The assimilation is continuing to take place, right? But even to the point where last night we were cheering against the house team. Kentucky played Mississippi State last night. If I remember correctly, I think Kentucky had more points at the end of that game than the other team did. I'm not sure, but I think so. Y'all can look it up. You can look it up. But anyway, also some of my travels have taken me to like Central America. And it's exciting to think about different cultures, right? I mean, it's fun to sort of immerse yourself for a moment, learn something new, meet new kinds of people, but it's a whole different deal when you choose that versus it being forced upon you. And I promise this is meant in no way to be a political slant one way or the other, but it's no secret that we're coming up against potential tragedy in the world in which the social media application TikTok is on the verge of ending for Americans. I don't know if you knew that. But, no, we're not. It is apparently a Chinese-owned company, and there's some privacy things, and so this is what I understand. And so the giant fear is that, other countries are looking into us, and, in a larger scheme, what would it look like? Imagine for a moment that our country is overtaken by another country that doesn't share its same political values, and even though we may be on far ends of the spectrum across the board here, we have a lot of things in common, believe it or not, that we don't share with people all over the world. And so could you imagine us living in a world where you wake up tomorrow and our government doesn't exist anymore? Can you imagine you wake up tomorrow and things are forced upon you that you never thought that you would have to deal with? And even just sort of dreaming about that and how wildly crazy that would be, you might start to get a glimpse of what it was like during the time of which we're talking about today, when Daniel was one of those. He was a part of the noble line of the people of God, the Israelites, right? He was Jewish, and he kept Jewish practices, and it was through their disobedience, and this is something we have to note. I mean, it's easy to jump into the story of Daniel and talk about his strength and his courage and to be able to walk against the culture. But we need to understand the culture he was walking up against was the product of the fact that the people of God had disobeyed God, and God had given them over to the reign and rule of Nebuchadnezzar. The fact that Daniel now, as we're going to learn, gets forced into this Babylonian culture that is being sort of forced up on him, to put it lightly, is all a byproduct, a result of the fact that God allowed the people of God to walk away from his will and his ways, and it brought them great tragedy. Now, it's not to say that God completely abandoned them. He just let them have their way, and that's never good when we get our way. It's obvious God didn't abandon them, because we got the story of Daniel, and that's what we're about to get into. So, Daniel, along with the rest of the people of God, are in this season where they have been taken over by this crazy king, Nebuchadnezzar, and the attempt is to completely change the culture, to force everyone to assimilate to this Babylonian culture. And in fact, Daniel comes into the story, as we're going to read in a moment, as one who is selected to be drawn out and to be molded into a leader for the Babylonians, right? And so, if you have your Bibles, we're going to read Genesis. Good Lord. A little bit further down the road, Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to read Daniel chapter 1. And let me just say, too, I highly encourage you to read ahead. So, for the next several weeks, we'll start cramming some things when we get to the visions. But for the next 5, 6, 7 weeks, we're going to follow just one chapter a week, right? So we're in chapter 1 this week. Next week, we'll look at chapter 2. The following week, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you want to get ahead for next week, go ahead and read chapter 2 when you get home. Go ahead and read back through chapter 1. But we're going to start in verse 1, chapter 1. During the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace, some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. So, you follow this, right? So the Lord gave the people of God, the Israelites, Judah, over to Babylonian reign and rule. King Nebuchadnezzar's in charge, and he sends for these men, these noble men, and he gives very specific instructions on how to go and select them, right? So he calls his chief of staff and says, I want you to go get me some guys. I want you to go get me some guys. And here's what it looks like. Verse 4, select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men. Sorry, that leaves some of us out. Make sure they're well-versed in every branch of learning, that they're gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter royal service. So the plan was to go get the best and the brightest, right? Bring them in, feed them out of the king's kitchen, and assimilate them into the Babylonian way of life so that they might, with all of their good-looking characteristics, right, all of their wisdom, they are the best and the brightest, that they would be then culturally developed so that they might then go to work for King Nebuchadnezzar himself, serving in the royal palace, right? Now, let's just pause here for just a second, because there's a little bit of background we need to consider, because it's easy to think about this from the perspective of a long time ago in a land far away, right? But if we are willing to think for a moment, Jesus himself said, my kingdom is not of this world. Do you remember that? My kingdom is not of this world. In fact, when we read, when we go in and jump in one of Jesus' first sermons, the one on the Mount, Jesus talks to us about a different culture than what we live in. And so if we're honest with ourselves, we love our country. We love our small town. We love everything that we enjoy in this moment, in this season of life. And to think about giving that up would be tragic, but the reality is this world is not our home. Let me say that again. As much as we enjoy it, this world is not our home. This world, with all that it has to offer, is not God's absolute best for us. We are part of a kingdom that is beyond the brokenness and the trappings of this world. We belong to a kingdom that is high above. And so in a way, and I don't think it's too far a stretch at all, you and I, like Daniel, like others, are living in a land where we are constantly being pressed and pushed to assimilate to a culture that is not God's best for us. And maybe you would argue with that, and you're welcome to. We could sit over coffee and argue that, but understand that I'm coming from a premise when I read this, and certainly when I preach this, that you and I live in a world, in a culture that is not fully lined up with all that God would have for us or from us. And so we can learn from what's about to happen in Daniel's life because we too are being pressed into a situation where we have influences from all over that would lead us in a direction that is absolutely opposed to God's best for us. Okay? So that's sort of the premise. And so how does the enemy approach? The enemy approaches by saying, go get me the best and the brightest. They'll be sort of my seedlings. I'll bring them in. Give me 3 years with them. I'll change them completely. And then we're going to put them into leadership. And so then they'll take all of their influence because they're from noble families, right? And they will slowly just creep into and completely change the culture of all those around us. It was a very wise move by King Nebuchadnezzar, right? So he sends for them. Here's what happens. Verse 6 says, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff named them with these Babylonian names. So, in this new culture, you don't even get to keep your name, right? You get a brand new name. You get a Babylonian name. So, we have Daniel is now Belteshazzar, right? Hananiah was Shadrach, and Mishael was called Meshach, and then Azariah was called Abednego, right? It's starting to be a little bit familiar, right? Fiery furnace. Yeah, okay, we'll get to that one later. Not today. We're going to get there. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. Verse 8, and please, 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 listen to this real quick. Listen to what happens here. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. Some translations would read, Daniel resolved not to defile himself, right? So there is a predetermined decision that Daniel has made to not eat and drink from the king's table. Now, you might be thinking, like, what? Like, what difference does that make? Like, didn't Jesus tell us, like, food's food? Understand, this was not a matter of food for Daniel at all. In fact, we can assume that if the food and the wine is coming from the king's kitchen, I can assure you it was the finest that was to be offered, right? It was the absolute best. I mean, we're assimilating these guys into this Babylonian culture, and so they are going to eat what the king eats. They are going to not want for anything. I mean, they are the best and the brightest. They're going to be the future leaders, right? And so it was a bit odd that Daniel would say, I don't want to eat that food, right? Was it gross? Was it weird? No, it was good. Like, you can assume that. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. Part of what, or in fact, all of what Daniel is pressing against, he refused to give up his Jewish identity, right? Daniel did not want to become a Babylonian. Daniel had resolved himself to remain Jewish in his identity. Let me also say this, side note, sermon for another day. Most all of our struggles, right, with sin, with temptation, with all the above, all of our broken relationships, all of our mistakes, most of our hurt stems back from a mistaken identity in who we believe that we are. Oftentimes we buy into what other people say we are. We buy into what we think someone wants us to be, and we lose sight of the fact that we are children of God and we owe our everything to Him. That's another sermon for another day, but you certainly got that free preview right there. And we'll get back to the regularly scheduled message where Daniel says, I don't want to eat that food. And the reason was, he says, I have Jewish practices and customs I'm not willing to give up. I follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I'm going to walk in his ways, and I will come, I will serve. And he's living in this sort of weird spot, right? He's not saying, I'm not going to come and work. I'm not going to come and follow. There's a point where I will not turn. So Daniel, I believe in this moment, is, we use the phrase oftentimes, living in the world but not of it, right? He is living in the culture, but he is not going to become a product of it. He is living in the culture, but he's not going to become a product of it. And so he says, I don't want to eat that food. In fact, he had decided, I'm not going to eat that food, right? We'll get to that point in a minute. Let's kind of finish out this story, and then we're going to come back to, and I'm going to give you like 5 things that I think are incredibly important takeaways from this moment where Daniel says he determines not to eat the food and the wine. So he asks, this is the latter part of verse 8, he asks the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel, but he responded, the chief of staff responded, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid that the king will have me beheaded. The chief of staff was worried about his own tail, right? His own head, rightfully so. Daniel spoke, verse 11. Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us, he says. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. So Daniel courageously, boldly just walks in to the chief of staff and says, I've already decided I ain't eating the food. And so what I would ask is that you let me avoid. In fact, for us four, if you would, allow us just to have vegetables and water. And then just, and the chief of staff's like, no. He's like, so he goes to the next in command, right? His direct report and says, listen, if you'll let us do this, just give us 10 days. 10 days. 10 days. Now, I don't know, Daniel, 10 days. And if we look, if it's as bad as you think it's going to be, we'll surrender. So in a major move of faith, Daniel says, just try it. Just test it. Just test it. So the story keeps going. You probably know how this goes, but we're going to read it anyway, right? Verse 14 says, the attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. Pause right there. Raise your hand if you've heard somebody talk about the Daniel fast or the Daniel diet, right? Dude, it's not a health kick, right? This has nothing to do with the food. Rightfully, he should have thinned out, and maybe, obviously, that may be what you're going for, but the whole deal here, there's nothing spiritual about only eating vegetables and water. The spiritual part of it is he wanted to eat what was within the bounds of his Jewish tradition, lest he lose that identity that he had pledged to live into as God's chosen son, right? So, all that being said, they test him. He lets him do it. The assistant allows them to do so. And so, after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of food and wine, and provided that he provided for others. So verse 17 tells us this, that God gave the 4 men, so not only are they healthier and better nourished, but then God gave these young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. When the training period, 3 years, right? When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters of his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. So pretty cool story, right? It comes down to diet. He says, I'm already set in my ways, and I'm only gonna, Jewish identity, and sure, he finagles his way through the chief of staff and the assistant, and he finally gets them to run the test, and the test comes back great. And so, and not only are they healthier and do they look better, better nourished, but they are filled with wisdom, right? They are an unusual aptitude. No one has ever commented on me quite like that. So I don't know about for you, but his obedience, I believe, is what led to this. Now let's get into a couple of thoughts to sort of wrap this up. So, hearing that story, it would be easy to walk away and just think to ourselves very quickly, like, oh, I should just become a vegetarian. Then I'll honor God and I'll be smart, I'll be healthier, and it's probably not a bad idea for most of us to even to try that, like, right? But understand, like, what happens here. There is a level of faithfulness and obedience that Daniel has that despite the pressing culture, he pushes against and says, I'm not going there. This is as far as I go. I will live in the world, but I will not become of it. And so a couple of things that I think are worth noting. Number one is that Daniel was determined. He was determined not to defile his body by eating this lavish meal, right? This lavish diet. He said, I will eat only the things that are permissible in my covenant with God, right? But I love, and again, like I said, another trade, like the English Standard Version says, Daniel resolved himself to not eat of the food, right? He resolved himself. There was a predetermined decision that Daniel made before he was ever sitting at the table. I believe he made the decision long before he ever got to the table that this is a boundary I'm not willing to cross. And so what I want you to hear is this, that if we will determine, that we must determine in the light how we will respond in the darkness. I had a pastor tell me that one time. Said, you need to determine in the light what you will do so that you might be faithful when the darkness comes. That pastor was teaching and mentoring me toward if temptation comes, right? It's a whole lot easier to say, no, I will not do this. This is a line I will not cross when you are not tempted by it. Lest you find yourself in the heat of the moment and you are being pressured and it is an opportunity to sin and to move away from what God would have for you. It's a whole lot easier to make that decision to fail unknowingly if you've not predetermined where you will take your stand. And so Daniel had determined ahead of time how he would respond. So many of us, we want to avoid sin. We want to avoid temptation, right? But oftentimes we make no predetermined effort. We just find ourselves in the situation. And if you've ever found yourself in a time of confession and repentance, you're looking back and you're thinking, I never thought, I don't know how I got here. I never thought it would have gone this far. I've counseled with people who have shared with me those things. I could give you my own testimony and say to you, yeah, you find yourself in a moment and you're in this moment of weakness, and 9 times out of 10, you're never going to be able to conquer that in your own strength. But if you determine ahead of time in the light, when God's grace is present with you and you're surrendered to it, like in a moment like this, we determine ahead of time, and then God's grace becomes more apparent to us in a moment of weakness because we've already visited that scenario. And so Daniel determined in the daylight. Daniel determined ahead of time how he would respond when times got difficult, and he's faithful in that moment. So in light of that, so not only did Daniel resolve ahead of time to how he would respond, but when we determine, prior determination, if you want to write this down, or if you want to write the one I just said down, determine in the light how you respond in the dark. Second, I would say prior determination prompts boldness under pressure. That prior determination prompts boldness under pressure. So when we decide ahead of time that we're going to walk in faithfulness, right? When we decide ahead of time this is a boundary I'm not willing to cross, then it's when that opportunity to be tempted comes, we are prompted with boldness to be able to resist and to say no. For example, with Daniel, right? He had determined ahead of time he's not going to defile his body with this food. And so I believe that predetermination for him allows him to go before the chief of staff and say, I don't want to eat this food, right? How many times do we sort of, I don't want to bother you, or what are they going to think about me if I say this, or, what if I go to that party and I refuse this, or, what happens when we say no? We don't ever really think about that ahead of time, right? And even when we find ourselves that we are so weak And the reality is, if we determine ahead of time, okay, this is what God's will is for my life, this is a line I cannot cross, this is a boundary I must protect. If we determine that ahead of time, it allows us to walk even into those tempting situations with the boldness to say, this is where I will go and I will go no further, right? Maybe it's ethics in your workplace. Maybe again, I don't know what it is for you or what it might be today and what it might be tomorrow, but we all will be faced with situations that a prior determination will lead us toward a bolder stance. So, consider, what are your boundaries? Where will you, how far will you go? And I'll let you sort of take it from there. The third point is this. The one thing we do know about Daniel is that Daniel feared only the Lord, right? Let me say that again. This one, third point. Daniel feared only the Lord. In verse 11, I believe it is, or verse 10, I should say. Verse 10, we read that the chief of staff responds to Daniel's bold request, and his response is, I hear you, because we know that he's been given favor with the chief of staff, right? He's been given, he's got respect and affection, the Bible tells us. But his response is still, dude, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this because I fear my own head, right? And so the chief of staff feared the king. David feared the Lord. Let me say that again. The chief of staff feared the response of the king. David feared no one but the Lord. And so David knew pushing back against this could cause him deep trouble with the chief of staff, even deeper trouble with King Nebuchadnezzar. But he did not fear them. His fear was the Lord and only the Lord. So Daniel feared only the Lord. And then fourth, Daniel chose faith over fear. We like to say this a lot, right? Faith over fear, like how just kind of, but I'm afraid sometimes we look at that as sort of a careless push through life. But Daniel was indeed very, very calculated in what he did and what he chose. But not only was he calculated, he also was fearless, right? He chose faith over fear. So when he looks at the assistant, okay, things didn't go that great with the chief of staff, so he just goes straight to the assistant. He says, will you give us 10 days? Daniel had no idea how that was going to play out. All Daniel knew was, God has called me to be faithful. I'm going to be faithful. And therefore, if God's called me to be faithful, and if I'm faithful, God's going to take care of the rest, right? And so rather than living in fear that if I push back against this, I might lose my job, right? Or pushing back against this, if I do this, I might lose a friend. If I say no to that, if I draw the boundary there, they might say bad things about me, or they might talk behind my back. The reality is David just said, no, this is where I will go, and if you will just test me, I promise you it's going to work out just fine. And David chose faith over fear. He chose obedience to God's will for his life over the circumstances and over fear of what might happen if he did. So, finally, the last one I would say is that faithfulness, David's faithfulness, brought God's honor, brought God's favor. Faithfulness brings favor. Faithfulness opens the door for God's favor. So, what does that look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. First and foremost, right, Daniel has been faithful through this whole scenario. And you're going to see that as the constant theme throughout Daniel's life as we track. What is also true is not only Daniel's faithfulness, but also God's favor and his faithfulness. So, the first and foremost is we read that God gave the chief of staff the respect and affection toward Daniel, right? And so that in and of itself is, again, Daniel being faithful, God granting favor. God granting favor. He gave him the respect and the affinity or affection from the chief of staff. Secondly, we read that even as they took that test, if you will, as they followed Daniel and his three friends, as they followed that menu, that they kept the boundaries, we see that they were healthier and they were more nourished, right? That only happened because God intervened, right? That only happened because God intervened. And then thirdly, God gave unusual aptitude for literature and all sorts of understanding. He even gave them the ability, or Daniel's specific ability, to interpret dreams and visions. That in and of itself, again, a gift of God's favor in light of Daniel's faithfulness. And then finally, he was elevated to royal service. That, again, God's favor in light of Daniel's faithfulness. And so, for us, if we're willing to reconsider this whole idea that we live as foreigners, strangers in a strange land. This world is not our home. We are constantly being pressed in upon by a culture, many cultures, to lead us in different ways. And let me just say, this culture pressing in upon us is not a particular political party, one or the other. We live in a world that is marred and marked by sin, and Satan would attempt to press in against us from every single direction. And so we must determine ahead of time, predetermine, that we're going to walk in faithfulness according to the will of God. And when we do, when we decide in the daylight how we're going to respond in the darkness, we're far more apt to be faithful in that moment. And therefore, our prior determination will prompt us to boldly walk in God's ways. We will fear the Lord only, and we will choose faith over fear. And we will trust God to bring his favor as we walk in faithfulness with him. That's my challenge for you today and every day, especially as we set out. I hope that you'll come back next week. We're going to close with a song here in just a moment. But I hope that you'll consider making at least the next 6 or 7 weeks, making this a priority for you, making a discipleship group a priority for you, so that you might be able to walk in the ways of God and be found faithful even in the midst of difficulty. The band's going to come as I pray. God, we thank you so much for your goodness toward us, for your call in our life, and God, your ability to intervene even when we walk in the path of temptation, to help us resist and to stay faithful. And so, God, help us this day, not only that we might honor you and have our lives reflect your goodness, but, God, that we might walk in a way that causes others to see your grace alive and work in our life, that they too might want to know, Jesus, just who you are, and that they would give themselves to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
The song that we're closing with today is kind of one that we used to do a long time ago. So it might be familiar to you, or it might be brand new again. But the words of it are kind of like a psalm. We've talked about following God no matter what, and the reason we can do that is because of who he is. So in this song, we're still making that declaration that we're going to follow, but it's because of the kind of God that we serve and his faithfulness and his character that we're able to follow him no matter where we go.
Yours is God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. I know who goes before me, I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The God of angel armies is always by my side.
Thank you for being here to worship with us today. We're so glad that you were here this morning. We hope you'll come back again next Sunday. Have a great week.